You're listening to Inside Lebo, a podcast giving you an inside look at Mount Lebanon, Pennsylvania. Hosted by Assistant Municipal Manager and Municipal Planner Ian McMeans and Assistant Public Information Officer and Online Editor Stephanie Hackey.
Hello and welcome back to Inside Lebo. I'm your host, Assistant Municipal Manager and Municipal Planner Ian McMeans.
And I'm Assistant Public Information Officer and Online Editor Stephanie Hackey.
Welcome back to the show, everyone. The weather's getting warmer. It's nice. You can go outside again, and it's pool season. And a few episodes back, we talked with Recreation Director David Donnellan about the municipal pool and how to get pool passes and when the public pool is open. We're here today with our inspections office folks to talk about private pools and what you need to do if you have a private pool on your property.
Yes, so welcome to Rodney Sarver. He is Mount Lebanon's Chief Inspector and Zoning Officer, and Josh Meyer, who is a building inspector.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for being here.
You.
We really appreciate it. So let's talk about pools. Again, I love pools, so I'm really excited about this one. So do you have to have a permit for a pool in Mount Lebanon, and why?
So you do. In 2004, whenever the state adopted the statewide building code, the building code at that time implemented pool regulations for building permit requirements. So starting in 2004, building permits were required for swimming pools. However, Mount Lebanon, prior to that, going back into the early 60s, always had regulations dealing with annual pool permits. And we can talk about that.
Yeah, what's the difference between a building permit and an annual pool permit then?
So a building permit basically regulates the construction and the layout of the pool, including the pool barrier and all safety devices for that. The intent of the code is basically to provide life safety for the code. So obviously children do not enter into a pool area and are subject to drowning
Right.
near a pool. So there's a lot of safety provisions within the pool code, and most recently, the last two episodes of the code, they took it out of the appendix of the actual residential code and they put it in its own code. So it's now known as the International Swimming Pool and Spa Code. So it not only covers swimming pool, but also hot tubs and spas.
That's good to know, because
Yeah,
I know
that's
there's
awesome.
probably a lot of people that have hot tubs and spas there too that
Right.
would also now need a permit.
Yeah. We do find them from time to time that put them in without a permits.
So if you're thinking about putting in not only a pool, but also a hot tub or a spa, you need to contact the inspections office to get a permit. So is the permit just for then in-ground pools, or does above-ground pools also need a permit?
So if you read the code, the actual scope of the code says the pool and spas covered by this code are either permanent or temporary, and shall only be those that are designed and manufactured to be connected to a circulation system and that are intended for swimming, bathing, or wading.
So does
So
that
if you-
count like a little kiddie pool kind
No,
of
so
thing?
if it doesn't have a pump to it,
Okay.
it doesn't count as a swimming pool. In the legislation that adopted the statewide code, they added language that basically said that if it can hold less than 24 inches of water, it's not a swimming pool. So going back to your question about kiddie pools, if it doesn't have a circulation system on it or built into it, and it holds less than 24 inches of water, it's not considered a swimming pool. Therefore, you don't need a permit for it. You can just do it in your backyard and not worry about it. But if it holds over 24 inches of water and it does have a circulation system, then you would need a building permit for it.
So even if it's a temporary, you just put it up in your backyard that summer and have the filter running and then take it down for the winter. I had one of those growing up.
Yeah, we
you-
actually issue temporary swimming pool permits.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So now you talked about the building permit. Talk to me about the permit, the annual permit that's required in Mount Lebanon.
So the annual permit is basically, it's designed to make sure that you have the safety device and you maintain and operate the pool in a safe fashion. So annually, usually middle of May, we will send out the pool letters. Matter of fact, they were just sent out today. I know a stack of them were. We notify the owners of the pools that they send in a permit fee, an annual permit fee, and then our code enforcement officer will set up an inspection with them, and they go out and they basically inspect every pool every single family residential pool in Mount Lebanon for these safety devices and for general compliance. And then basically if it passes, they're good. If it doesn't pass, they'll advise them of what they need to do to correct it.
That's awesome. So it sounds like we go a step above and beyond what the state is requiring even then. Is that correct?
Correct.
And this has been since the 60s?
Correct, for the local ordinance.
Yeah. Why did they adopt it back then? Was there a reason? Do you know?
I have no idea. I would assume it was just for general safety.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
That's one of those interesting historical tidbits, though, that Mount Lebanon passed pool regulations back in the 1960s, and the state didn't adopt them until the early 2000s. So we were kind of 40 years ahead of the curve.
Right.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So talk to us about the permit applications then. How do you get a permit application? Or do you send those out to folks whenever you know they have a pool?
Well, we get a lot of phone calls about pools. Josh, he put together a handout, so I'll let him talk about that.
Yeah, so for a building permit for a residential swimming pool, if you're installing something new, it is a building permit application. So on our website, we have a residential building permit application. And I did generate a handout just for general informational purposes that'll be available on the website. If it's not now, it will be soon. But the residential building permit application, and then we'll need 2 copies of your property survey, basically to show where it is on the property, showing zoning compliance. And that should be a 2-scale property survey, and which means it's printed on the paper it's meant to be printed on. It shouldn't be reduced, so we know exactly where the swimming pool is. Then as far as the pool itself, details or drawings on the pool, what type of pool it is, whether it's above ground or in ground, and then some general requirements about the barrier, what type of barrier you're putting in, and how that is compliant with the code. And the barriers could be pretty complicated. It could be a fence. It could be for in-ground pools. It could be a what they call a powered safety cover. Part of your home can serve as the barrier in instances. The code gets very complicated with the barrier. So, but as far as actually applying for it, we're looking for barrier compliance. We're looking for the pool compliance, where it is on your property, in a residential building permit application.
What is the reason behind the barrier? Is that the safety, kids not getting in, things of that nature?
Yeah, correct. I mean, it's different because we get a lot of questions and people applying for new pool permits that say, well, I have an existing fence. Doesn't that count as a barrier? And sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. The easiest rule of thumb for barriers is it's basically to prevent a child from climbing into the pool area. So if it's made up of a fence-type structure, it regulates the opening size so that a child's toe or a foothold, they call it, or a finger hold, that they can't climb over that barrier. And then if, as Josh mentioned about the wall of the home acting as part of the barrier, it requires alarms on the doors and windows. Wow. So that if some kid does not climb through a door or climb through a window and not noticed, so an alarm would go off basically telling the occupants that somebody entered the pool area.
Oh, wow, that's really awesome, actually. As a parent, I'm thinking, oh my God, I would love this. If I had a pool, I would really want this for sure.
Definitely. So, and I'm laughing as you guys kind of talk about, kids climbing things. I'm like, whoever wrote the code never met my kids because they can climb anything. They can climb the walls of my house. So once you get the pool permit, you said it's an annual, obviously there's the building code one you have to get when you install a new one. You have to get the building permit for construction. But then every year we do an annual permit as well. Just it's a safety check through our building inspection and code enforcement office.
That's correct, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so we won't charge you an annual pool permit for a brand new pool that first year. But after it's finalized, if it's finalized, the previous year, we'll issue you an annual permit the following year.
Gotcha. And how many of those permits do you guys issue every year?
Annual permits?
Yeah.
I believe there's
260-ish around there.
Yeah.
It's a lot of pools.
That's a lot.
It is.
Yeah.
That's a lot of work for your department too, to go out and inspect all those, because I'm sure everyone wants to try and open the Memorial Day weekend or right around there too.
Right.
So I'm sure you're
Yes.
inundated with calls. Okay.
When do you actually have to have the permit by then? Is it before you open your pool every year that you have to have that permit ready?
No, you don't have to have it, or you don't have to have the permit in hand before you open it. You should pay for the permit, and then we come out and do those inspections once the permit's paid for.
Okay.
Because part of the application, when you submit the payment, is whether or not you choose to open up your pool that year. There are some residents that choose not to open up their pool, and therefore we won't do an annual inspection, and you don't have to pay for an annual permit if you don't open it.
Gotcha. That's good to
Makes
know.
sense.
So I think we're going to take a short break here, and we'll be back with more information on residential pools. Welcome back to Inside Lebo. We're here with Rodney Sarver and Josh Meyer from our building inspection office talking about residential pools. So you mentioned earlier about fences, that you're required to have a fence for safety purposes to keep children out. And you said you can use your house as a barrier. Is there anything else you can use as a barrier? Obviously, we're Mount Lebanon, not flat Lebanon. So, we have some topography here in the community. Can you use hillsides and slopes as a barrier, or does that have to be fenced as well?
There are regulations in the code that allow for natural topography to serve as a barrier. Things that are high enough and not climbable is the gist of what the code is asking for. But yeah, usually the quickest solution to a barrier is some sort of fence abutting the house. But there are other regulations that allow for those things as natural topography and things, yes.
And the key thing is that there's tighter regulations for a pool barrier than there are for a typical fence. Like I said earlier about the footholds and handholds, obviously it's tighter. The spacing between the horizontal members of the fence or the barrier, if they're tighter together, then the space between the vertical members have to be closer. If they're further apart, then you can have a typical 4-inch wide opening, just like you would on a guardrail for a deck or something. So we run into a lot of problems where contractors will put decks next to pools and construct it like they're constructing a typical guardrail so somebody doesn't fall off of a deck or an elevated surface. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it will meet the pool barrier requirements. So it's a fine line there to make sure that everything is matched up correctly.
Gotcha. What about slides? Are you allowed to have slides to go into your pool?
You can, as long as basically it's inside that pool barrier requirement.
Okay.
So again, most recently in the last 2 editions of the code, they have allowed a powered safety cover that is recently allowed. So a lot of people most recently, and I think you would agree, Josh, that we see more and more in-ground pools that people apply for permits that are putting automatic power safety covers on. So when the pool is not in use, the pool cover automatically closes over top of the water, so that even if a child is in the area, they don't fall into it. That would exempt you from an actual fence barrier or a pool barrier.
Interesting.
Yeah, the powered safety cover really reduces the amount of additional barrier requirements there are for the property. So if you have the powered safety cover, if you're installing the powered safety cover, you may not need to do a fence barrier as well or similar. I do see a lot of those when I go out for inspections. A lot of people are putting powered safety covers on and still installing a fence just because they like to have it enclosed. So,
and it's the same requirement for a locking safety cover on a hot tub. So technically, if it has a circulation system, which most hot tubs do, and you hold more than 24 inches of water, you have to have a barrier around the hot tub as well. But the exemption was a lockable safety cover, which most hot tubs come with. So the pool aspect of it caught up with the hot tub aspect of it as far as providing a safety cover.
So there are a lot of ways then that you can provide a barrier to this pool then. It's not just one simple, hey, a 5-foot fence or whatnot. There are a lot of different requirements for
Yeah, the
this.
typical rule of thumb is 48 inches.
Okay.
So you need a 48-inch high barrier. So the pool itself for above ground pools, if it's a sheer wall pool and it's higher than 48 inches, and the pool manufacturer allows the side of their pools to be used as a barrier, then it can be used as a barrier. You can use a chain link fence that's 4 foot high. The problem with chain link fence is most of the openings are bigger than 1 3/4 inches, and that's the maximum opening allowed in a chain link fence, again, for that foothold and handhold for
Right.
small children to climb over.
Yeah, your common chain link fence that you would see is 2.25-inch gap, and to meet a pool barrier requirement, the maximum is 1.75 inches.
Oh, wow. So it would have to be a special fence then,
Yeah,
pretty much
it-
to...
A lot of the pool or fence manufacturers that install fences, they call it a pool barrier fence.
Making it easy for the folks who are looking to buy one then, right?
Sure.
Put it right in the name. I would need that. So, obviously we hope all of our residents follow these rules, but I'm sure sometimes you have someone who doesn't. What happens if someone doesn't apply for that annual permit and still opens their pool?
Well, again, if we do not get a payment back or an application saying that they are or are not opening the pool, then we will still do an inspection just to see where it's at. If they are, then they would get a violation notice. If they ignore the violation notice, then ultimately it could lead to a citation. But the vast majority will comply, so.
Have you ever had to go in and drain a pool because someone wouldn't listen?
No, we haven't. Under the annual pool permit ordinance, we do have the right to basically take actions for a life safety issue. So, for example, I could just think of if somebody was deceased and they had a pool with water in it, we could probably go in and take actions to make sure that either the water is drained or that there was some type of cover over it.
That makes sense. Gives you a lot of power, for sure.
So as part of your annual inspection, when you go out and look at all 200 plus pools in the community, are there certain safety things that you're looking for as part of that inspection?
Yeah, so including into the application for the annual permit, we also include a list of all the safety devices that you need. And some of the examples of the safety device is a throw ring. It's 18 inches in diameter at least, 1/4-inch rope. That rope should be long enough to go diagonally halfway across the diagonal length of the pool for in-grounds, or at least halfway across the round pool, so that you can reach somebody that might be in the pool that needs assistance. It also requires that you have like a strong pole with either a shepherd's hook or a blunted end, so that you can lend somebody assistance if they are struggling, that you can extend that pole out and pull them closer to the side. We also do maintenance checks as far as how they're storing their chemicals, and we look at their barriers, their existing barriers, because barriers do wear out. The wind comes along or a tree takes a part of it out. The biggest problem that we have is the self-latching gates, and the fact that the gates have to swing away from the pools. And the reason for that is they don't want a child pushing onto a gate and being able to push it inward. Mm-hmm. So if it swings out, they can't, no matter what, and no matter how they push on it, they can't open the gate. So those are two of the requirements that basically we look at for all the pools as part of the annual inspection.
And I will point out on the barrier for the safety inspection, we look at the barrier in compliance with the time it was actually built, the pool. So if the barrier requirement is as strict as it is now, but the pool was installed in the 80s, the requirements may be a little bit less in the 80s. So we're looking at the barrier as if when it was installed to make sure it's in good condition, and basically it complied. It's the same as what it was when it was installed.
So those requirements change over the years, is that correct?
They have changed over the years. Like I said, in 2004 was the first one. It was in the Appendix G of the 2003 International Residential Code, and they have changed. So that's why Josh mentioned that, and we have a spreadsheet that we use for the pools that the inspectors now, when they go out to a certain address, they know when that pool permit was issued. Therefore, they can determine whether or not it needed to meet a certain requirement.
Oh, that's great, for sure.
Gotcha. So you mentioned chemicals and obviously other pool maintenance items. Are there any regulations on like what kind of chemicals you can use in your pool, or what maintenance you have to do on a pool throughout the year?
Just to have to basically maintain it to an extent where it's clean and healthy state. The county regulations, the county health department, they basically consider any water that comes in contact with the human body as considered gray water. So you should not discharge your pool water into the street or onto your property or into a neighboring property, it should be disposed of through the sanitary sewer system, because technically it's gray water and it came in contact with the human body. So if you drain your water from the pool, it should go into the sanitary sewer. So we tell people sometimes run it into your fresh air vent, or if you have a nearby sanitary manhole, you can drain it into that. But most of the time you don't have to drain. Me personally, from experience, I own a pool, and a lot of times you get evaporation, so you're adding water rather than draining it.
Right.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then obviously the county health department has rules about stagnant water too, with mosquitoes and all that you have to be cognizant of, even for the kiddie-sized pools, that you don't just leave.
Correct, and that's one of the
stagnant
reasons
water.
why we go back as part of the pool annual pool inspection, is if they don't send in their permit fee and application stating whether or not they're opening or keeping it closed that year, the reason we still go out is to make sure that for some reason, if it's a vacant or abandoned, that there's no stagnant water in there that would cause a mosquito problem, and then we can take appropriate actions under our health safety ordinance to basically eliminate that stagnant water condition.
Gotcha. That makes sense. Well, thank you guys very much for joining us today. This was very edifying. Any final thoughts or anything, takeaways that people really need to know about their residential pools that we didn't cover?
Really, if you have any questions, just give our office a call. We're happy to answer any questions for installing new pools or anything involving the annual safety inspection. So,
And what's that phone number again?
412-343-3408.
Awesome. Yeah, give them a call. They're willing to answer any questions. I think
Absolutely.
I think you said that last time as well. You're willing to talk to our residents if they have any questions.
We'd much rather, solve a problem before it actually happens. That way it doesn't cost you any money.
Well, thank you both so much for being on this show. That's it for this installment of Inside Lebo, produced by Carrie Monyo, with music by Drew Monyo and graphics by Chris Leeper.
We'll be back in a few weeks with another episode of Inside Lebo.
Thanks for listening to Inside Lebo, produced by Mount Lebanon's Public Information Office. Learn more about all things Lebo at mountlebanon.org or by following our Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram pages.